always used to lay you clean up the messes. Down on my knees, thought I couldn't stand up on my own. Turns out sometimes you're stronger alone.
So this week I wanted to talk about a very serious topic, the topic of how Jehovah's Witnesses used the Holocaust for their own benefit and how their leaders were trying to cozy up to Hitler during the process. And this is born out of an experience that I had. What I'm about to go over is a reflection of a Facebook post that I made in 2023. My wife and I had gone to St. Louis, and during that time, we decided to make a trip to the Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum, something that we didn't even know existed there. But while we were there, we saw it, and so we decided to go ahead and visit it. My feelings going through that museum were very complex. My video here is only tapping into a very small part of what went on internally while taking that tour. But there were some things in it that it brought up that I wanted to point out. And so I wanted to go ahead and take this opportunity to start the discussion, and perhaps the discussion will continue in the comments afterward as well. First, let me not be guilty of the same thing that I'm about to talk about and point out that what the Jewish people went through, as they were by far the majority, was really horrendous, and there just really aren't words to describe it. Looking at the numbers killed, especially in Poland, and all the propaganda produced against the Jewish people was just incredibly sad. Again, words don't really touch on the depth of those emotions. Seeing little kids' shoes from the concentration camps and such was really emotional. I learned some things about that time as well, and the response or lack thereof from countries like the United States until the war in general touched the country. I digress, but I just wanted to point out that the Holocaust was not primarily about what I'm about to talk about, because it was presented to me in a certain way growing up that hit home while I was going through this museum. I have a feeling I'm not the only one. All right, so many people who were not Jehovah's Witnesses do not know that Jehovah's Witnesses were also targeted, among others, in the Holocaust. While we were there taking the self-guided tour, I couldn't help but have my ears perk up when the tour guide that was working with others, in the other words, said the words Jehovah's Witnesses. Growing up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses as a kid, when that time was mentioned, all anyone ever did was talk about how we as Jehovah's Witnesses were impacted. There was barely a mention of the Jewish people or any of the other people who were tragically killed. Seriously, I mean, you would have thought as a little JW kid that the Holocaust was primarily about the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses and that Hitler had vowed to eradicate us off the face of the earth. This is what I was told. To make matters even worse, Jehovah's Witnesses in the 1980s were leaning heavily on that imagery of concentration camps. As children, we were told that in the near future, possibly as early as tomorrow, because it's always imminent, the United Nations would deem religion something that should no longer exist, and that when it turned on religion, we would enter into a period called the Great Tribulation, a time when all others would abandon their religions, but we as Jehovah's people would stand fast. Because we would stand out like a sore thumb as literally the only believers that were still standing in this world, all of the nations would turn on us and throw us into concentration camps. The cult exploited the imagery and the stories of that tragic time to pump fear into the hearts of children in order to control those kids, of whom I was one, to make them do what they wanted them to do. Many had nightmares. Some couldn't sleep because at any time, like a thief in the night, as the scripture says, all of this could happen and life could change in a very terrifying way. Walking through that museum, all those things were on my mind. Only really seeing it through the Jehovah's Witness lens growing up, never being in a place like this where it's obvious what a tiny fraction of a fraction of that incomprehensible time Jehovah's Witnesses made up, it's absolutely shameful how they exploited that. It's shameful that they used it to stoke fear, as if they were anything more than a tiny sideshow to the main horrific event. While I have tremendous compassion for those Jehovah's Witnesses that were tortured and that lost their lives, likely children as well, I have no compassion for the cult that pushed people in that direction or for their continued use of that calamity to propagate their control. They have no conscience and are so self involved that they have no shame. Honestly, it made me mad to even hear them mentioned in the other room by the tour guide. It made me mad to see them recognized on the panels that were in these various rooms. Why? Because Jewish people couldn't not be Jewish. People with certain disabilities couldn't not be disabled and thus targeted. But as the one panel brings out in the photos, Jehovah's Witnesses could have walked out. They could have signed a piece of paper renouncing their religion and walked free. Now, according to the panel, there were no reports of any doing so. But let's talk about that, because as a child, I heard that too. And it was used to show what strong faith Jehovah's Witnesses had and how God helped them to maintain it despite all odds, even potentially taking away their pain as they died painful, tortured deaths, because God will not test you beyond what they can bear, even if death is that way out. Personally, I don't trust Jehovah's Witnesses to be honest and report if there were some who faltered in their faith. I've seen too many lies in general, and they care about appearance over substance, so that simply may or may not be the case. But let's say that it is the case, that no Jehovah's Witnesses signed that piece of paper. Is that evidence of divine blessing of some sort? Is that evidence of great faith? Or does that just go to show how absolutely brainwashed you would have to be to stand firm in the face of that and to willingly submit yourself and potentially your children to that fate? If your goal in life was to preach the good news and to help people, and you could sign some stupid piece of paper that you don't believe in and walk away from a horrible fate for you and your kids so that you could go forth into the earth and preach again, wouldn't that be better than martyring yourself? Again, you could have walked out of those camps. You could have saved your kids. How is that noble? It's reminiscent of Jehovah's Witnesses that refuse blood transfusions and die, or let their children or their pregnant wives die because of their belief that blood is sacred and that life is in the blood, thus blood equals life. Well, by refusing a blood transfusion, you're putting the symbol of life, according to you, which is blood, above life itself. Why would your God want you to die refusing a blood transfusion that could mean your life because blood symbolizes life and is precious to your God? Make it make sense. So it was just so infuriating to see and hear Jehovah's Witnesses spoken about or written about in that museum as those that suffered at Hitler's hands. They didn't have to. They literally chose to, and somehow view that as a source of pride and something to use to exploit the fears of those vulnerable individuals that meet them and that are then programmed by them. Also, I learned things after leaving the cult, like how Joseph Rutherford, the leader of the cult back then, basically wrote a letter identifying with Hitler and singing the praises of what they were doing in Germany at the time. Quote, "These two magazines, The Watchtower and Bible Student, were the only magazines in America which refused to engage in anti-German propaganda, and for that reason were prohibited and suppressed in America during the war. In the very same manner, in course of the recent months, the board of directors of our society not only refused to engage in propaganda against Germany, but has even taken a position against it. The enclosed declaration underlines this fact and emphasizes that the people leading in such propaganda, in parentheses, Jewish businessmen and Catholics, also are the most rigorous persecutors of the work of our society and its board of directors. This and other statements of the declaration are meant to repudiate the slanderous accusation that Bible researchers are supported by the Jews." The conference of 5,000 delegates also noted, as is expressed in the declaration, that the Bible researchers of Germany are fighting for the very same high ethical goals and ideals, which also the national government, it's hard to even read this. It's just Such utter insanity. So I'll start that paragraph over. The conference of 5,000 delegates also noted, as is expressed in the declaration, that the Bible researchers of Germany are fighting for the very same high ethical goals and ideals which also the national government of the German Reich proclaimed, respecting the relationship of humans to God, namely, honesty of the created being towards its creator. The conference came to the conclusion that there are no contradictions when it comes to the relationship between the Bible researchers of Germany to the national government of the German Reich. To the contrary, referring to the purely religious and unpolitical goals and efforts of the Bible researchers, it can be said that these are in full agreement with the identical goals of the national governments of the German Reich. We are looking forward to your kind approval, which we hope to receive soon, and want to assure our highest respect to you, Honorable Mr. Reichskanzler. I'm sure I butchered that. Yours faithfully, Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, Magdeburg. I'm sure I butchered that as well. But anyway, I'll put a link in the description with more information on this. There's a lot more to the story and a lot more infuriating things to read. Walking through that museum years ago would have made me proud. Proud to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses who stood up in the face of evil and would not back down because we had God's backing. Now, it is so shameful to think of ever walking into a museum like that with such feelings. Making the pain and unfathomable trauma of other people about me as one of Jehovah's Witnesses is just unconscionable. To overlook what many millions of others went through because of what a few thousand Jehovah's Witnesses went through is so narcissistic, so tone deaf, so self-involved, so disgusting. Again, you'll notice that I said a few thousand, not the millions of Jews who were killed there, and the hundreds of thousands of other groups. I think it said, what was it, like 1,500 Jehovah's Witnesses died in there? 1,500. Now, every one of those 1,500 is a tragedy in and of itself and a horrible thing that ever happened. But to grow up like we did with that being the focus, to act like that was somehow about us, it's just absolutely mind-blowing that they could do that to us. To add to it, to think about how I was made to fear these types of camps as a kid through the emotional terrorism of the cult as they made up dystopian fairy tales to strike fear into the hearts of young kids while taking their innocence away is just so beyond the pale. What are you thinking, Jehovah's Witnesses? You think the world is out to get you? You're a non-existent entity on the world scene, trying to glean some sort of place in the world off the pain of others, so desperate to be somebody that you would willingly martyr yourself to try to justify the end. Again, I am so sorry that some fell for that and did go through the extreme pain and heartache of those camps, like so many Jehovah's Witnesses have, for absolutely nothing. What a waste. And I'm absolutely gutted to hear and to see in that museum what others that had no choice went through because of who they were. Not that it really matters, but I've got a lot of Ashkenazi genetics myself, always having been told that my grandfather's parents came to the United States from Russia way back when. I may have some sort of heritage that was impacted by the Holocaust. I don't know. Nothing was ever spoken about it. And honestly, I have a lot of ignorance surrounding the topic because I was too busy as a kid being brainwashed by a cult that told me distorted facts. Ultimately, I'm so glad that I went to that museum, though. Perhaps someday I'll go to others. This experience has brought up so many complex feelings. I'm sure that anyone who's ever been to such a place can relate. Jehovah's Witnesses are the ambulance chasers of religion, never letting a tragedy pass or go to waste because it's always an opportunity to exploit the emotions of others in some way. In fact, to carry this on just a little bit, I wanted to read something to you. This is from jwfacts.com about the Holocaust. And looks like in 1999, there was a letter from Watchtower to a fund that was put together dedicated to help living members of the Holocaust. But Watchtower decided that they should get some money, not living members. But again, didn't I just talk about how they're ambulance chasers who exploit the pain of others, always looking for something for themselves? So let me just read this to you. This is a quote. Again, this is all on the site. I'll link to it below. Copy of the Watchtower application letter for some of this money. Included is a request to receive a portion of the funds on the following basis. Quote, some witnesses died prematurely and left no heirs to make a claim to the Swiss Bank Settlement Fund. However, the legacy of spiritual resistance that they left behind is of great value in the education of future generations about the importance of standing up for the dignity and value of human life. Representing these individuals, the Watchtower would be pleased to devote any allocated monies solely to the interests of Holocaust education and the remembrance of the prisoners who bore the purple triangle according as the court might stipulate. Yes, Watchtower tried to get money out of this settlement that was to go to living embodiments of what went on in this horrific event and a testament to human life and the continuation of it and those people who did eventually make it out. And Watchtower is holding their hand out saying, can I have some? That is, and you know what do you think that their museum would be if they built one, right? Isn't it just going to be about how great, again, the purple triangle people were, Jehovah's Witnesses? It's all going to be about them. It wouldn't be, unlike the Jewish Holocaust Museum, the Holocaust Museum I went to that focused on the Jews' experience there and many others, including Jehovah's Witnesses. You think Jehovah's Witnesses are going to have a museum dedicated to the pain and suffering and resilience of another community and everything that was going on? Do you think that they're going to put Rutherford's letters in there to Hitler to show the reality of what they were doing? Of course not. And it's disgusting. Now, unfortunately, today, it looks like former victims of an attempted genocide are potentially carrying out their own in Gaza. I'm not going to claim to understand all of the intricacies, but I will say this: killing isn't the answer on any side of a divide. I would condemn ex-Jehovah's Witnesses enacting violence on Jehovah's Witnesses, something that I'm actually going to talk about in a future video. And I would condemn the killing that kicked off the current violence in Gaza. But violence hasn't managed to stop violence yet, and it's not the way forward. We have to stop othering people. We have to stop dividing and conquering as some sort of race to the bottom of humanity. And at some point, we've got to grow up as a society and handle things like adults. So what about you? What was your experience as one of Jehovah's Witnesses with the Holocaust? Did you visit the big National Museum and Memorial in Washington, D.C.? I just learned with that one in St. Louis that apparently there are many different memorials and museums around the United States. And of course, maybe you live outside the United States. Do you have experiences to relate from your own visits in other countries? Comment below and let's shine a light on the realities of all of this in this public forum. Share your stories below. If you have an idea for something you'd like to see discussed, go to shunpodcast.com and submit it through the contact page. If you're struggling to move past the cult of Jehovah's Witnesses and the impacts on your life, I work with many individuals daily in my cult recovery coaching practice. I'm also working hard to bring new resources to the ExJW community through efforts to lift individuals up financially, through job opportunities, to help market your own business ideas and networking opportunities as well. Go to exjwhelp.com, that's exjwhelp.com, to find help and to also find opportunities to help others by supporting these efforts individually. You can get help, but you can also support people as well. I put a lot of time and effort into all of the activism that I do, from this podcast and YouTube channels to things like the ExJW cart that I developed to take out, to my initial podcast, This JW Life, and Esta Vida como Testigo de Jehovah. I'll never say that right. That is nearing completion as a translation of this JW Life in Spanish. And all of the websites and equipment cost money and take maintenance as well. Over the year 2023, my Patreon support fell by a whopping 55%. So if you would like to support the work that I do financially, you can go to patreon.com/shunned to support monthly. And I've been doing this consistently since 2017. So thank you to everyone who has supported over these years. I know it's your time and money, and I appreciate that you put some of that into the coffers to help me do what I do. So it's always appreciated. So until the next episode, love yourself and others, do no harm, and go be happy.